This is where demystifying wine becomes, I think, really, really important. The idea is to make people comfortable. Say, okay, you have these thousands of choices available to you. Pick something that you think might be interesting, a category, a varietal, a geography, and then work your way through it over time. But the goal for us is being involved in our family, being involved in the wine business, is to make it interesting and fun, not condescending and pretentious. Right? I don't enjoy some of the pretense that exists in our industry. It's unnecessary, right? And the word down to earth probably is such a meaningful phrase, because if you really think about it, we're farmers. We're dealing with the earth and with farming and growing, and our business is really a down to earth business. And it's maybe this is my challenge. It's a challenge for me to see how something so delightful and interesting and provocative could become pretentious. It's just unnecessary. But at the end of the day, I always recommend focus, as I said, focus on a category, focus on a varietal, focus on a price point, focus on a geography. Pick a place that's at some level definable, and then work from there. I'm often asked, how do I learn more about this? And my view is trial. But if you want to learn about Chardonnay, I would suggest that you drink 3 or 4 of them next to each other so that you understand the differences in either the place or the winemaking. That's another challenge. Does this wine taste this way because it's a representation of a place? Or does this wine taste this way because it's great chemistry on the part of a winemaker? Those are 2 very different things. And I often find myself trying to explain wines of place versus wines of taste. I find Santa Barbara absolutely fascinating for a number of reasons. Number one, it's actually, the closer you are to the ocean, the cooler it becomes. And there's this little triangle of space in Santa Barbara, Santa Rita Hills. I'm going to back up a second. So if you think about the formation of the California coastline, right, came up out of the ocean 10 million years ago. So it's marine-based soil generally to begin with. If you look at the coastline of California, it runs north and south mostly, and the mountain ranges generally run north and south, with the exception of one place, which is Santa Barbara. And if you look at the map, you see that the mountain range actually takes a left-hand turn, and it stops, and there's a gap, and then the mountain range begins again north of Santa Rita Hills. And in this triangular gap that was created through a geologic anomaly, you have a funnel where the ocean comes in and blows and cools. It's a cool maritime climate, and cools this little area that's called Santa Rita Hills, Santa Barbara County, right? And so first is marine-based soil. Second is incredibly cool. Third is enough sunlight to actually fully ripen grapes. And then if you think of this as a series of concentric circles and kind of get down to the Sanford Winery, Sanford and Benedict Vineyard, our property, the Sanford and Benedict Vineyard, is very different from the neighbor's property. It was created as a result of a landslide probably 10 or 15,000 years ago. There was a small kind of hillside that slid off of itself down towards the river. And so this soil there is Monterey shale, immeasurably deep, high water holding capacity, the perfect place in which to grow vines, right? So Michael Benedict and Richard Sanford in 1971 had identified this location as ideal for grape growing. Interesting because this was the first Pinot Noir vineyard that was planted in Santa Barbara County in 1971. So there's no precedence. And Michael, being a botanist and understanding plant life, believed that this was the correct place. And then he does something very interesting. He purposefully chooses to plant Vitis vinifera on its own roots. He chooses not to graft it to rootstock. At the time, his thinking was, it was well thought out. If you ever have the opportunity to meet Michael, and I suggest that you should meet him, he's a fascinating human being, but nothing he does happens by chance. It's well thought out. And his view was, well, we may have phylloxera in Santa Barbara at some point in time, but knowing what I know about phylloxera and its movement, it'll probably take 50 years to migrate from where it exists today to Santa Barbara County. Knock on wood, we do not have phylloxera in Santa Barbara County. And he says, I'm going to plant on Vitis vinifera on its own roots, fully recognizing that 40 or 50 years from now, this will need to be replanted. Sure. It was well thought out. So today, 45% of the vineyard that we own and farm at Sanford and Benedict is Vitis vinifera on its own roots. So when I bring Burgundian friends to see the vineyard, they're stunned. This is nirvana to have Vitis vinifera on its own roots, no rootstock. If we could do this in Burgundy, we would, but we cannot. So Sanford's a fascinating place. I'm at some level fixated. A California vineyard being and applying the heart of Burgundy, Cour de Bourgogne, right? So the Burgundians have spent 900 years trial and error. You go back to the monks, and they started memorializing the trials in the vineyards, and some vineyards were better than others. And I figured that after 900 years of trial and error, they've probably learned some things that might be applicable to a California vineyard. And I want to be careful here because people say, well, aren't you trying to copy Burgundy? And the answer is absolutely not. Burgundy is impossible to be replicated, period, end of story, in the same way that Napa is different from Santa Barbara. Right. So I thought, okay, there's some things that they're doing that are over that 900 years that are at some level interesting, and maybe there's some things that we could learn from those trials and their farming and their winemaking. And we're now trying to apply that type of thinking to the Sanford Vineyard and yielding some very, very interesting results.